Here's how it all unraveled. Bulldozers. My grandfather's old fence. And somehow, I became the villain. They rolled in, wiped out a piece of my family's history, and they sued me for trying to stop them. No, it wasn't a bad joke or some bizarre internet story. It was my reality. Honestly, it feels like I've been dropped into the worst kind of reality show. And to make it worse, I can't shake the feeling they're keeping an eye on me. At this point, I'm half seriously weighing the benefits of disappearing to some deserted island. The roar of diesel engines at 6:30 in the morning is not something you expect on a ranch that's been in your family since before the Civil War. I shot out of bed, still in my boxers and a faded t-shirt, and rushed to the window. What I saw made my stomach drop. A bulldozer was chewing through the oak fence that had marked our land for generations. The operator sat in his climate-controlled cab like it was just another shift, completely unaware or uncaring that every swipe of that blade erased a part of our history. My grandfather had built the fence himself, using hand-cut oak posts and pure Texas pride. Every section had been placed with care, following the natural rise and fall of the pasture. Since 1875, every Hayes man had maintained died of fixing storm damage, replacing old posts and treating it as more than a boundary line. Watching it splinter apart, I didn't just see wood breaking, I saw pieces of my family's legacy being ground into dust by someone else's greed. I didn't stop to get dressed. Anger fueled me as I bolted outside, sharp gravel biting into my bare feet. But as I neared the machines, confusion started mixing with my rage. Why were they here? Who gave them the right? Stop! Get off my land! I yelled, my voice cracking with fury I didn't know I had. The bulldozer operator looked at me like I'd escaped from a mental hospital, then casually pointed toward a woman by a spotless white pickup. That's how I met Jillian Harper. Mid-40s, sharp black business suit, clipboard clutched like it was some sacred relic, and an expression colder than a January morning in the Texas Panhandle. When I stormed up to her, still out of breath, she didn't even look ashamed of what her crew was doing. Instead, she gave me a smile like a shark catching sight of bleeding prey. Mr. Hayes, she said, voice crisp enough to cut glass, this is a legally approved easement. We're building a road through your property. You should actually be thanking me. I'm about to increase your property value. I just stared at her, wondering if she seriously thought I'd be grateful while she demolished my grandfather's fence. The sheer nerve of this woman was unreal. She waved a stack of official-looking papers under my nose like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Everything's legal. Filed with the county. Approved by the right authorities. You have no grounds to stop us. Her tone like I was too ignorant to understand property law made my blood pressure spike. I should have realized then she was going to be trouble. I yanked my phone out and called 911. While waiting for the police, I grabbed whatever old wood and barbed wire I could find and started putting up a makeshift fence across their freshly laid asphalt. I hammered private property and no trespassing signs with the kind of desperation that comes from watching strangers tear apart everything your family has built. The police arrived before I could finish. But instead of arresting Jillian or her crew, they told me I'd have to prove the land was mine. This ranch had been in my family since before Texas became a state, and suddenly I had to justify being here. Jillian handed over her easement papers like she already knew the outcome. The officers scanned them as if they were sacred law. Looks legitimate to me, sir, one said, returning the documents to her like a library book. I wanted to tell him about my ancestor carving this place out of prairie grass and grit, but his face told me he'd already decided. That evening, I was still standing among the ruins of our fence, trying to process the fact that bulldozers had plowed through 5 generations of family history, when a delivery truck pulled in. The driver handed me an official envelope that made my hands tremble before I even opened it. Inside was a lawsuit from the HOA demanding $25,000 for unlawfully blocking a public easement. They were suing me for trying to protect my own property. As I stood there stunned, Jillian turned to me with that icy smile. You have no idea what's coming next, she said. The weight of those papers in my hands felt heavier than steel, and the thought of what they meant sent my mind spinning. The lawsuit wasn't just a demand for damages, it was a masterpiece of dense, convoluted legal jargon. The HOA wanted the $25,000 they claimed I owed, plus all court costs, plus a permanent injunction barring me from ever putting up another barrier in the future. On top of that, they were tacking on $500 a day in fines for what they called continued obstruction of essential community infrastructure. I went through the document 3 separate times before the full weight of it hit me. By the time I grasped the scope of their demands, my vision was practically swimming with anger. The numbers alone were staggering, and more than I usually cleared in profit from the ranch in a good year. And that was before adding legal fees and court costs, which could easily double or even triple the total. If they won, I'd be staring at financial ruin so complete it could force me to sell the very land I was fighting to protect. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Defending my family's legacy might end up destroying it. Finding a lawyer willing to take on an HOA proved harder than I thought. Most attorneys I called either handled divorce cases or personal injury claims. The few who did property disputes seemed to lose interest the moment I mentioned a homeowner association. That's when a friend suggested William Davis, a veteran property attorney in his 50s who'd fought his own battles against HOA. Apparently, they'd once tried to make him tear down his backyard workshop, citing an obscure architectural rule no one had ever heard of. William's office looked exactly how you'd picture a small-town lawyer's dean, law books piled high, a coffee maker that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton years, and a desk buried under a mountain of case files that seemed to multiply on their own. From the moment we met, I saw a spark in his eyes. He wasn't just another lawyer chasing billable hours, so he understood exactly what was at stake. "This isn't just about your property," he told me, leaning back like he was about to settle in for a long fight. "This is about stopping them before they steamroll every family ranch from here to Dallas." What impressed me most was how quickly he took the fight personally. He pulled a thick folder labeled HOA abuse cases from his shelf. "I've tangled with their kind before," he said. "Same tricks every time, bully tactics, questionable paperwork, deep pocket lawyers bankrolled by developers. They count on regular folks being too scared or too broke to fight. But your fight is my fight now, because if we don't stop them here, they'll just keep carving up old Texas until nothing's left." William didn't even need 5 minutes with Jillian's easement document before his expression shifted from interest to suspicion. He studied it like a detective who'd just spotted something everyone else had missed. "This is dated 1985, he said slowly, "but look at this notary seal. It's too crisp, too perfect. And why would your grandfather give up property rights right before he passed? Legally, practically, it makes no sense." That's when we found the first crack in their airtight case. Buried deep in the 3rd page, hidden behind a wall of legalese, was a single line Jillian never mentioned during her smug little speech. "Grantor maintains right to revoke easement with 30 days written notice." "If this is real," William said, excitement creeping into his voice, "your grandfather could have canceled the whole easement with a single letter to the county clerk." The question I said, did he? Meanwhile, Jillian's harassment hadn't slowed. Every morning like clockwork, another violation notice arrived, each one tallying $500 a day for any barrier I put up. After 3 days, the mounting fines forced me to take down my makeshift fence and signs, though I left security cameras rolling 24/7. Watching strangers drive through my land as if it were a public road turned my stomach, but I was out of options for the moment. The mental strain was almost worse than the financial hit. Every day brought a fresh reminder that this was a fight they intended to win by breaking me before we ever reached court. Neighbors I'd known for decades either stared as they passed or looked away entirely, as if my situation was contagious. The unspoken message was clear: this is what happens to anyone who challenges the machine. At first, a few people voiced their support, but one by one, they fell silent. Fear has a way of shutting people up. "And then they had the nerve to sue you?" William said one afternoon, shaking his head in disbelief. "First they bulldoze a fence older than the telephone, then they turn you into the criminal for defending your own land. I've seen plenty of outrageous cases, but this one might top them all." His anger was almost as satisfying as his promise that we'd fight this all the way to the Supreme Court if that's what it took. The deeper we dug into the timeline, the more the whole thing started to stink. William began pulling county death records on my grandfather, cross-referencing them with property filings, a broken bar when we cross-checked the dates on Jillian's easement document against county death records, What we uncovered should have been impossible. My grandfather's death certificate clearly stated he passed in December of 1982, but the notarized easement was dated March of 1985. William set the death certificate down like it might explode. "This could be the break we need," he said slowly. "Your grandfather couldn't have signed these. He'd been gone for over 2 years when this was supposedly notarized." He stared at the easement paperwork again, his brow furrowing. "Something about this document is very wrong," he murmured. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to my grandfather, to the evenings we'd spend on the front porch after dinner. He'd sip coffee, his hands weathered from decades of ranch work, and tell stories about the old days, about rustlers, swindlers, and land grabbers who'd use every trick possible to take from honest ranchers. "Never trust anyone who wants your land, Cameron," he'd say, gripping his coffee mug like it held the universe's secrets. "They'll use every trick in the book and some that ain't in any book yet." Had he somehow known something like this would happen? Was there a warning in those words that I'd been too young or too stubborn to understand? While I wrestled with memories and sleepless nights, William got to work. He brought in Dr. Sarah Kim, a certified handwriting expert who had testified in federal cases involving document fraud. When she finished her analysis of my grandfather's signature, her verdict was more damning than we dared to hope. Laying out comparison photos across William's conference table like evidence in a murder trial, she explained, "This signature was traced from a genuine document. The pressure patterns and ink flow show clear signs of forgery, but whoever did this was highly skilled. This isn't some amateur neighbor with tracing paper." Meanwhile, William widened the scope of our investigation. He dug into county property records for other cases that might mirror mine. What we found made my stomach knot and my blood run cold. 4 other long-established family properties had been taken using nearly identical posthumous easements over the past 5 years. Each followed the same formula: property owners who had died years before supposedly signing away land rights. These legal time bombs went unnoticed until it was too late, by which point grieving or intimidated families couldn't mount an effective defense. That's when William suggested we talk to one of the earlier victims. I agreed, and the visit turned into one of the most gut-wrenching conversations of my life. Elena Rodriguez was 72 and living in a modest home that had been in her family nearly as long as my ranch had been in mine. She welcomed us into her kitchen, poured coffee into chipped mugs, and began her story, one that made me want to put my fist through a wall. "They told me in English I don't understand good," she said, voice trembling with anger and shame. "I signed papers thinking it was to help the community. I thought maybe they would build something nice for the children. Now my garden is gone forever. When I ask for it back, they laugh." Her garden wasn't just a hobby, it was a 1/4-acre plot overflowing with tomatoes, peppers, and corn, feeding her grandchildren and half her neighborhood. The HOA bulldozed it, claiming they needed the space for emergency vehicle access to a luxury subdivision they were planning. When she tried to plant somewhere else on her own property, they slapped her with a violation notice for unauthorized landscaping and threatened daily fines until she removed what they called non-compliant vegetation. It was obvious that they didn't care about rules. They wanted her gone. Looking at the county records as a whole, the pattern was impossible to miss and infuriating in its precision. Every victim was elderly, had owned valuable land for decades, and happened to live beside areas earmarked for luxury developments. The HOA targeted those least able to fight back, knowing each win would make the next one easier. But Jillian wasn't satisfied with just seizing land. She wanted to isolate us too. She hosted community meetings where she painted me as a selfish, backward rancher who cared more about old fence posts than public safety or neighborhood improvement. Her smear campaign worked. Some neighbors I'd known my entire life started avoiding me, afraid that being seen with me might make them the next target. The pressure was relentless. Every morning, I'd wake wondering what fresh attack Jillian had lined up. Another legal notice, another forged document. Each time I saw her signature on one of those fraudulent papers, it felt like a punch to the gut. Every evening, I'd stand at what used to be my property line, watching strangers drive across land my family had protected for 5 generations. I'd stand at the edge of what used to be our property line, watching strangers cut across land my family had protected for 5 generations. and the weight of it hit me like a stone. I was letting them down. Was I imagining things, or was Jillian really running some elaborate scheme to strip us of everything my family had built? That question pushed me to dig deeper. Somewhere in my grandfather's old papers, I hoped I might find anything that could help us fight back. The attic was small, dusty, and so crammed with boxes it felt like stepping into a time capsule. Nothing had been moved since my grandmother passed 15 years ago. For hours, I sifted through tax records, faded property maps, and stacks of family photos. It all seemed ordinary until I opened a shoebox hidden under my grandmother's recipe cards. Inside was my grandfather's original will from 1982, written in his unmistakable handwriting. I had never seen it before. One clause in particular made my hands tremble as I read it aloud. This land shall never be subject to easements without unanimous consent of all living heirs, and such consent must be renewed every 10 years. It was as if my grandfather had foreseen exactly this kind of legal assault and drafted his will to block it. And here was the kicker: it had never been processed through probate court. That meant it was still legally valid, according to his wording. The easement Jillian was using as the backbone of her case couldn't have been granted in the first place. It felt like we'd found the silver bullet to destroy their lawsuit. At least, that's what I told myself. In hindsight, I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. But holding that will in my hands, reading words my grandfather had written more than 4 decades earlier, I wanted to believe the fight was already over. Still, something in my gut whispered that this was only the beginning of it. There were darker truths I hadn't uncovered yet. As I reached for my phone to call William, a new document slid under my door. I hadn't even opened it before I sensed trouble. William saw the will as a game changer. The invalid easement opened the door for us to go on the offensive via filing a motion to dismiss their lawsuit and countersuing for fraud. But he also warned me that this would escalate things. The moment we became a genuine threat, we'd be in more danger than ever. I'd be lying if I said I didn't wonder if the risk was worth it. The pressure was suffocating, but every time I thought about quitting, I pictured my grandfather's calloused hands gripping a fence post, refusing to let go. That kept me moving. What we needed now was proof that Jillian's ties to loaner development went deeper than the public consulting contracts we already knew about. William reached out to a whistleblower inside the county FSC, someone who'd been quietly watching the corruption unfold, but was too afraid to come forward without protection. They insisted we meet at a remote spot, after midnight. That alone told me this wasn't just about pushy neighbors anymore. We were dealing with organized criminals who had their claws in local government. The meeting happened at a shuttered gas station 15 miles out of Tona, the kind of place you only see in crime dramas. The whistleblower pulled up in a beat-up pickup with no plates, a baseball cap pulled low. "They'll fire me if they find out I talk to you," they whispered, sliding a manila envelope into William's hands. "These people have connections everywhere, the courthouse, the cops, even the paper. You're fighting something bigger than you think." Inside the envelope were photocopies of transcripts from closed-door county commissioner meetings. They showed Jake Morrison pushing through easement approvals for loaner development without the state-required review process. The records outlined 3 years of corruption and Morrison rubber-stamping every single request tied to loaner or its shell companies. Many were approved in under 24 hours, despite normal environmental and legal checks taking weeks or even months. Around this time, our story finally caught the attention of the press. That's when Jillian launched a PR counterattack that was slicker and nastier than I'd expected from a small-town HOA fight. Local news ran with our allegations about forged documents and county corruption. Within hours, Jillian was on TV, polished and perfectly composed, framing me as a stubborn rancher blocking emergency access routes. "What if someone dies because an ambulance can't get through?" she asked viewers. It was a masterful twist to turning a legitimate property rights case into a question of public safety. Dishonest? Completely. Effective? Absolutely. But if Jillian wanted a media war, we weren't about to wave the white flag. William started lining up interviews with sympathetic reporters who were willing to hear our side of the story. A broken bar. Some journalists were finally willing to dig into the corruption story instead of parroting the HOA's narrative. We handed over copies of the forged easement paperwork and county death records that proved beyond any doubt my grandfather couldn't have possibly signed them. Compared to Jillian's emotional sound bites, our fact-based approach began to sway public opinion. But the shift in momentum also made her more reckless and dangerous. William decided it was time to take a bolder stance. That's when Jillian made her move. She showed up at my ranch one evening without warning, behind the wheel of her white pickup, holding a briefcase that looked suspiciously full of cash. She spoke in a calm, almost friendly tone. "Cameron, I'll give you $100,000 in cash, plus a signed agreement that the road will be used only for true emergencies. This can all end tonight if you'll be reasonable." When I turned her down, the friendliness vanished in an instant. Her voice dropped low, dripping with menace. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. We have resources you couldn't imagine. We've crushed bigger problems than one stubborn rancher. This is your last chance to walk away." The threat was crystal clear. It wasn't just about taking my land anymore. She meant to ruin me, and I believed she had the power to do it. I wandered along the same fence line my grandfather built decades ago, hearing his words echo in my mind. "This land chooses its people, son. It'll fight for those who belong here, but only if they fight for it first." Standing on soil that had been in my family for nearly 150 years, I knew I couldn't back down. Things escalated when the HOA hired Sterling and Associates, a high-powered Dallas firm infamous for bankrupting small landowners through sheer legal muscle. They filed an emergency motion accusing me of endangering public safety, complete with fabricated reports and bogus traffic studies designed to make me look like a danger to the community. This wasn't just dishonest, it was criminal. But we weren't alone anymore. Elena Rodriguez and other families rallied at the courthouse, bringing press coverage and raising $45,000 for our legal defense in less than 2 weeks. Standing there surrounded by neighbors risking HOA retaliation to stand with us, I realized this fight had grown beyond my ranch. It was about proving the powerful couldn't simply take what they wanted because they had deeper pockets and political connections. I didn't know then how vicious their retaliation would be. It started with intimidation, like the shadowy figure I saw one night at the edge of my property. When I stepped toward them, a voice called out from the darkness, "You're not going to win this fight, Cameron." The evidence we'd gotten from the whistleblower at that deserted gas station had allowed us to go on the attack, but it also made us bigger targets. Loner Development, the company behind the upscale subdivision that needed the road through my land, had quietly bought a dozen parcels surrounding my ranch over the last 3 years. William's eyes went wide when he saw the figures. They'd paid about 20% under market value every single time. That doesn't happen by coincidence in a booming real estate market. Somebody had been applying pressure to make those sales happen, but without highway access, their land was practically worthless except for farming. If they got the easement through my ranch, though, they could build 200 luxury homes and pocket around $50 million. Suddenly, Jillian's relentless pursuit made perfect sense. Unfortunately, understanding her motive didn't make the reality any less brutal. My savings were bleeding out in legal fees, and William didn't sugarcoat the risk. We could lose everything, but giving in would mean betraying the very legacy my grandfather fought to protect. William warned me about the real danger. "If this goes south, Cameron, they won't just want the $25,000 in damages they're asking for now. They'll demand you cover every cent of their legal fees. And Sterling Associates isn't exactly a discount operation. You could lose the ranch just trying to pay their attorneys." That was my lowest moment, at the point where I had to face the possibility that 5 generations of my family's work might vanish. Not because we were in the wrong, but because we simply couldn't afford to be right. Things took a darker turn when William's office was broken into one Tuesday night in late September. Nothing was stolen, which somehow made it worse. Every document related to the HOA case had been scattered across the floor, a silent but deliberate message to back off before things got uglier. The front door's lock had been expertly picked, and the security camera lens had been spray-painted black sometime between 10 and midnight. William called it professional intimidation. I called it exactly what it was, a warning that we were getting too close to the truth. Our digging soon revealed just how far Jillian's reach extended. The real muscle behind her land grab scheme was hiding in plain sight. County Commissioner Jake Morrison, for 5 years, Morrison had signed off on every questionable easement without ever holding the public hearings required by law. And his wife, she worked as a consultant for Loaner Development A, earning a six-figure salary for work nobody could explain. When William requested her consulting contracts, we were told the details were proprietary and couldn't be made public. Then Jillian herself arrived at my driveway one afternoon, flanked by a private security guard built like a wall and looking like he'd been hired to scare people into submission. Her professional mask was gone. "Mr. Hayes," she said, standing there like she owned the place, "if you keep harassing HOA board members and spreading lies about our legitimate business practices, I'll have no choice but to file trespassing charges against you. This is your final warning to step aside." The guard didn't speak, but the way he stood with folded arms and one hand near whatever he had under his jacket said everything. I'd heard stories like this before in the news, on message boards but never imagined I'd be the main character in my own real-life version. It felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare, but the stress was painfully real, wrecking my sleep, killing my appetite, and making it hard to focus on even the simplest ranch chores. We went over every possible move, but finally William suggested the boldest one yet, countersuing. If we could pull it off, it might flip the game entirely. Meanwhile, Jillian was running a textbook smear campaign against me. She started a petition, gathering 40 neighbor signatures claiming I was blocking essential community improvements. The local paper even ran an editorial calling me a stubborn rancher standing in the way of progress, written by someone who never once asked for my side of the story. In their version, I wasn't a victim, I was the villain, and disturbingly, it was working. What would you do if you found out your neighbor wasn't just trying to steal your land, but was running a well-oiled scam that had already ruined other families? Would you keep fighting when the legal bills were threatening to bankrupt you? Or would you take a settlement, cut your losses, and walk away? Those questions haunted me at night. In our small town where everyone knows everyone's business I could feel the shift. Longtime neighbors avoided eye contact in the grocery store. Some probably thought I was being unreasonable, others were just afraid to be seen taking my side. The isolation was nearly as heavy as the legal and financial strain. Then came the night they appeared at my ranch again. That was when I knew this had gone far beyond legal filings, and this was about survival. With bills piling up to the cost of a new pickup truck, I actually considered Jillian's settlement offer for the first time. Maybe I could just take the cash, buy land somewhere far away, and start over somewhere without power-hungry hoes, corrupt developers, or county commissioners willing to sell out their neighbors. Maybe I was being stubborn instead of brave, clinging to something already lost. But every time I thought about giving in, I heard my grandfather's voice in my head, the one that taught me to fight for what's right. I thought about the old will we'd found in the attic, convincing myself it might be the key to winning. But was it really a path to victory, or just another false hope before they crushed me under their resources and connections? That's when it hit me. Winning in court would only be the start. The real fight for justice was about to ignite in ways I couldn't have imagined. And then, one night, a shadow moved across my porch. Someone was watching. The emergency hearing turned into the fight of my life. Sterling's attorneys rolled in with a polished, high-budget production charts coded in colors, fabricated traffic studies, and fake emergency response data that painted my ranch road as a critical lifeline for public safety. They even brought in paid actors pretending to be concerned residents worried about ambulance delays. Sitting there watching them lie so smoothly and convincingly, I finally understood why so many families had folded before ever stepping into court. Sterling's team had clearly perfected this act over years, presenting their falsehoods with the kind of theatrical precision that could sway even the most skeptical judge. Marcus Sterling himself, a silver hair, custom-tailored suit, and the confidence of a man used to getting his way, took the lead. In his opening statement, he cast me as a reckless extremist, a selfish landowner willing to endanger innocent families. He twisted the concept of property rights into something ugly and antisocial, doing it so elegantly it almost sounded reasonable if you didn't know the truth. Judge Patricia Williams seemed to be buying it at first. From her bench, she looked down at me like I was a stubborn child. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "if your actions prevent emergency responders from saving lives, This court must put public safety ahead of personal property rights. The greater good sometimes requires personal sacrifice. Her condescending tone made my jaw tighten, but I kept my composure, trusting that William knew exactly when to strike. When he did, it was like watching a dam break. William dismantled every claim they'd made, piece by piece, using hard evidence and official county records that couldn't be spun. He subpoenaed actual emergency service data, proving that 2 other access roads to the subdivision already existed and were faster than the route through my ranch. Their entire case crumbled under the weight of documented truth. He laid out authentic county maps showing how Sterling's own studies conveniently ignored these faster routes. "Your Honor," he said, "their safety argument relies on selective, misleading information designed to deceive this court." The shift in the room was immediate. Judge Williams' expression hardened as she examined the real records. Then came the testimony. Fire Chief Robert Martinez stated his department had never needed access through my ranch and had never been delayed in reaching the area. The county's ambulance director confirmed response times averaged 6 minutes via existing roads compared to 9 minutes if forced through my gates and cattle guards. And then came the moment that changed everything. William called Jillian to the stand. Confident and composed, she swore she had no personal financial interest in any of the easement decisions. "My only motivation is the safety and improvement of our community," she said with polished sincerity. That's when William dropped the hammer. Bank statements showing Jillian had collected $280,000 in consulting fees from Loner Development over 3 years, plus shares in the very company developing the seized land. She wasn't just complicit, she was profiting directly from the theft. Her confidence shattered. She stammered that the fees were for legitimate work and denied involvement in easement approvals. But it was too late. Elena stepped forward with a witness who had seen the notary seal altered sealing Jillian's fate. The revelations triggered an immediate investigation. By the time the hearing ended, federal agents were at the courthouse with warrants. They uncovered a multi-county scheme worth over $2 million, targeting elderly property owners with forged documents and fraudulent easements. Jillian was arrested for conspiracy, fraud, and running what prosecutors called an organized property theft ring. Desperate, she tried to shift blame to rogue home members, even painting herself as a victim blackmailed by County Commissioner Jake Morrison. But investigators had already followed the money straight to her personal accounts. Every new lie only deepened the charges: obstruction, perjury, and more. The verdict in my case was decisive. Judge Williams dismissed the HOA's lawsuit, ordering them to pay my legal costs plus punitive damages. In her words, the case was frivolous litigation with malicious intent, designed to facilitate organized criminal activity. I was awarded $78,000 in legal fees and $50,000 in punitive damages. Jillian pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering, receiving 4 years in prison and $600,000 in restitution to her victims. Morrison got 2 years behind bars and a lifetime ban from public office, while his wife lost all consulting contracts and faced civil suits from every family they'd wronged. The corrupt HOA board was dismantled. We'd won but the fight had drained nearly everything from me. The corrupt HOA was dismantled under federal court oversight, and every fraudulent easement they'd pushed through was declared null and void. Every parcel stolen through forged paperwork was restored to its rightful owners without cost, including Elena Rodriguez's cherished garden, where she wasted no time in planting anew. But the most satisfying outcome came when the former HOA was ordered to tear out their illegal road and return my ranch to its original state. A $140,000 project funded entirely from their own emergency reserves. Watching crews carefully replant centuries-old oak trees in the exact spots my ancestor had chosen felt like witnessing history repair itself. The restoration took 3 months and required craftsmen skilled in the old fencing methods used back when the ranch was first established in the 1870s. Meanwhile, Loner Development collapsed within half a year, crushed under mounting legal bills and the public backlash of being tied to an organized land theft ring. Their luxury subdivision was scrapped, and new county laws were passed to prevent similar scams from taking root again. All the land they'd stolen through falsified easements was returned to the families they'd wronged. Elena not only got her garden back but also received $10,000 in damages and coverage for legal expenses. Standing on my restored ranch 6 months after this nightmare began, with the sun setting over newly planted oak saplings, I could almost hear my grandfather's voice in the wind. "You did good, boy." The land seemed to say it too, as though it knew I would fight for it just like every Hayes before me. Elena later invited me to her first harvest celebration after rebuilding her garden. She fed fresh vegetables to 3 generations of her family and half the neighborhood that had stood by us during the fight. "Now my grandchildren know what real justice looks like," she told me, eyes brimming. "They'll remember that good people can win if they stand together against bullies." Watching the children play there reminded me this was never just about property lines, it was about community and legacy. With part of the settlement money, I started a legal defense fund dedicated to helping rural families fend off HOA abuse and land theft schemes. It offers free legal aid to those without the means to take on powerful opponents using fraudulent deeds or corrupt officials. "No family should face this battle alone," I said at the fund's first meeting. "We defend each other's property rights the same way our ancestors defended this county." The most poetic moment came half a year later when Jillian's foreclosed luxury home built on land she'd stolen from another family went up for auction. I bought it using money from the judgment she'd been forced to pay me, then immediately donated it to the county for veterans housing. Turning her ill-gotten mansion into a place for those who had served their country felt like the perfect full-circle moment at fitting close to a fight that began with bulldozers tearing down my grandfather's fence. This ranch has weathered the Civil War, the Great Depression, devastating droughts, and now a modern-day criminal conspiracy. Some things, I've learned, are worth defending at any cost. This land is more than soil and fence posts say. It's my family's history. It can't be bought, it can't be stolen, and it sure as hell can't be corrupted by greed. As long as there's Hayes blood running through this place, it will stay in the family just as my grandfather intended when he built the first fence.